I thought I was just painting her kitchen, until her two friends walked in. That's when she leaned close, her voice low enough only for me to hear, and whispered, "They're not here for the walls." The day began simply enough. I had agreed to help her paint her kitchen, nothing more than a neighborly favor that somehow felt like more the second I stepped inside. Her kitchen wasn't large, but it carried her touch everywhere. Sunlight came through lace curtains, spilling across pale countertops and an oak table that looked like it had seen years of morning coffee and quiet conversations. She had already moved most of the chairs aside, leaving space for ladders and paint cans. Still, the room felt warm, lived in, and distinctly hers. She greeted me with that calm, unhurried smile of hers, the kind that made you feel instantly steadier. She wore an old button-up shirt tied loosely at her waist, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a smear of white paint already across her wrist. Somehow, even in that casual state, she carried herself with the kind of grace you notice without wanting to. I opened the paint can, the sharp scent filling the air, mixing oddly but pleasantly with her faint perfume. She teased me lightly about my lack of experience. "You'll regret volunteering when you see how many coats these walls need." But there was no edge in her voice, only warmth, an easy humor that made me want to keep the conversation going no matter the topic. We painted side by side, brushes moving in long strokes along the faded yellow walls. Sometimes we worked in silence, sometimes we exchanged small jokes. And in those quiet moments, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of glances, of awareness, of something unspoken building between us. At one point she leaned in close to check a corner I had just finished. Her shoulder brushed mine, and though it was the lightest touch, I felt it linger long after she stepped back. My forearm still held the memory of her hand when she steadied the ladder for me, her fingers briefly pressing into my skin before releasing. I noticed things I shouldn't have been noticing, not in that situation, not given our age difference. The way the sunlight lit her hair, catching hints of auburn that might otherwise go unseen. The way small creases formed at the corners of her mouth when she concentrated, making her beauty seem more grounded, more real. She was in her 40s, yes, but it wasn't a number I saw. It was presence, it was elegance, it was the kind of attraction that demanded no explanation. And though I kept my brush moving steadily along the wall, part of me wondered if she felt the same subtle awareness. If she, too, noticed the pauses in our laughter, the small silences that seemed to stretch just long enough to feel like something else. It was just a kitchen. Just a job. Just two people painting walls together. But somehow, even in those first hours, I sensed that the real story wasn't going to stay on the walls at all. We had fallen into an easy rhythm, the kind that makes time slip by unnoticed. My brush dragged in long, steady strokes while she hummed quietly to herself, standing a few feet away, bent slightly as she worked along the trim. The kitchen smelled of fresh paint and faintly of lemon polish from the countertops she had wiped down earlier. Outside, I could hear the occasional rumble of a car passing and a bird calling somewhere down the street. It was peaceful, domestic in a way that felt unexpectedly intimate. Then came the knock. At first, it was just a sound, 3 sharp taps on the front door, echoing faintly through the house. She froze for half a second, brush lifted mid-stroke, then set it down carefully on the rim of the tray. "I wasn't expecting anyone," she murmured, almost to herself. Her voice was calm, but I noticed the faintest flicker of something in her eyes. I stayed put, watching as she wiped her hands on a cloth and disappeared down the hallway. The knock came again, lighter this time, followed by the muffled creak of the door opening. I could hear voices, feminine, warm, carrying that easy familiarity people share when they know each other well. Then footsteps, confident and unhurried, approaching. 2 women entered the kitchen behind her. Both around her age, both striking in ways that were impossible not to notice. One had sharp cheekbones and dark hair cut in a sleek bob, a kind of elegance that reminded me of old photographs. The other wore her hair loose and wavy, her smile softer, more inviting, though her eyes were keen, observant in a way that made me suddenly aware of the paint streak across my forearm and the sweat dampening my shirt collar. "This is him?" the one with the bob asked lightly, her tone half teasing, half assessing, as her gaze drifted over me. I felt my chest tighten, caught between curiosity and a sudden awareness of being on display. I nodded politely, unsure what role I was playing in a conversation I hadn't yet been invited into. She, my hostess, cleared her throat softly. "He's helping with the kitchen," she explained, though her voice carried a note of something I couldn't quite place. She gestured to the walls, the paint cans, the brushes. But the other women hardly looked at the walls at all. Their attention kept slipping back to me, lingering in ways that felt deliberate. They moved easily around the kitchen as though it were their second home. One draped her scarf over the back of a chair, her perfume trailing faintly behind her. The other set a leather bag on the counter, fingers brushing the edge of the table as though marking her place in the room. They exchanged a glance with their friend, something quick and silent that seemed to pass between them without words. And just like that, the balance of the room shifted. What had been a quiet, almost private world between the two of us suddenly felt larger, charged with a new energy I didn't yet understand. The scent of paint no longer dominated. Instead, it mingled with two different perfumes, the air suddenly crowded, layered. I dipped my brush back into the tray, pretending to focus, though my mind was elsewhere. Whoever these women were, whatever they had come for, I had the distinct feeling that this was no casual visit. The walls might have been drying around us, but something else had just begun to stir in the room. I tried to focus on the wall in front of me, dragging my brush in careful strokes, but my concentration had already slipped. Their presence shifted the air in the room, 3 women now, all older, all carrying themselves with a quiet confidence that made me feel younger than I ever had before. Their voices blended into a low hum of conversation, but every so often, I felt their eyes flick back toward me, lingering a second too long to be accidental. One of them laughed softly at something I didn't hear, a warm, throaty sound that curled through the kitchen like smoke. Another leaned against the counter, her bracelets clicking faintly as she folded her arms, watching me with a look that was equal parts curious and amused. I knew I should have felt self-conscious, maybe even out of place, but instead I felt pulled in, as if I were the only thing in the room worth noticing. Then she, my hostess, moved closer. I sensed her before I saw her. The faint shift of air, the soft tap of her bare feet on the tile. I froze when I felt her presence at my shoulder. She didn't touch me right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch for just long enough that my heart started to beat faster, anticipating something I couldn't yet name. And then she leaned in. Her perfume was subtle, floral, but unmistakable. I could feel the warmth of her breath against my cheek before I even heard her voice. When she finally spoke, it was low, so low that it belonged only to me. "They're not here for the walls." For a moment I couldn't move. The words sank into me, heavy, deliberate, echoing louder than any knock on the door. I turned my head slightly, and for an instant her lips were so close to mine that the smallest movement could have closed the distance. But she pulled back, just enough to keep the line between us humming with unspoken meaning. I glanced toward the table. One of her friends was stirring a cup of tea, the spoon clinking rhythmically against porcelain. Her eyes never left me, watching through the gentle swirl of rising steam. The other sat at the edge of a chair, her chin resting in her hand, lips curved in a half-smile that felt like it knew far more than I did. I wanted to ask her what she meant. I wanted to laugh it off, to say something clever, to break the tension with anything at all. But I didn't. Because deep down, I already understood. The walls were just an excuse, a backdrop. I wasn't here to fix her house. I was here because they wanted me here. I set my brush down carefully on the tray, suddenly aware of how steady my hands weren't. When I looked back at her, she was already watching me, her expression calm but her eyes alive with a challenge, with an invitation she didn't dare speak aloud. And in that charged silence, the truth pressed in on me. Nothing about this afternoon was going to be simple anymore. We eventually drifted from the paint trays and brushes to the kitchen table, where her 2 friends had already made themselves comfortable. A teapot steamed gently in the center, the faint scent of chamomile and mint softening the sharper smell of paint still hanging in the air. Cups clinked softly against saucers, the ordinary sounds of hospitality, but the atmosphere was anything but ordinary. I sat across from them, feeling, in some strange way, like the only guest at a table that had been waiting for me all along. Their attention was subtle but steady, every glance carrying a little weight. The three of them talked easily, laughter punctuating their sentences, but every so often, the conversation bent toward me, as though testing where I fit in their circle. "So," the woman with the bob began, resting her chin lightly on her hand. Her eyes were sharp, the kind that didn't just look at you, but through you. "How old are you again?" 24. I answered, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. Her smile deepened, the corners of her lips curving like she'd expected that answer. "So young," she said softly, not dismissive, not mocking. Just thoughtful. The other friend leaned in slightly, her bracelets chiming together, as she placed her elbow on the table. "And yet you don't seem nervous." Her voice was warm, almost playful. "Most men your age can't even sit still when three women are looking at them like this." Heat crept up the back of my neck, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. "Maybe I am nervous," I admitted with a small smile. "I'm just trying not to show it." Their laughter came in a soft ripple, not cruel but amused, like I had passed the first unspoken test. I caught my hostess's eyes across the table. She didn't laugh as loudly as the others. Instead, she gave me a small, quiet smile, as if to say she was proud of me for holding my ground. The conversation shifted, travel stories, books, even a bit of town gossip, but I realized quickly that every topic was just another way of circling back to me. They asked about my family, my plans, what I wanted out of life. Their tone was casual, but their eyes betrayed something else. They weren't just filling silence, they were listening, studying, weighing me like I was more than just company for an afternoon. At one point, the friend with wavy hair reached across to brush a streak of paint from my sleeve. Her touch was light, but deliberate, her fingertip gliding just long enough to make my pulse skip. She smiled as if she'd done nothing unusual, but her eyes held mine a beat longer than necessary. Later, when I leaned forward to set my cup down, the other friend's hand rested near mine on the table. Not touching, just close enough that if either of us shifted even slightly, our fingers would brush. She left it there, her bracelet silent now, her expression unreadable. The air was no longer simply heavy with paint and tea. It was thick with something unspoken, something that moved in every glance, every pause. I wasn't just helping with the kitchen anymore. I was being invited into something deeper, though none of us dared to name it yet. And all the while, my hostess watched quietly, her expression calm but her eyes alive, as if she were waiting to see how far I was willing to let myself be drawn in. At some point in the afternoon, her two friends excused themselves. Something about needing to fetch a bag from the car, though the way they left together, still murmuring to each other, made me wonder if they were giving us space on purpose. The kitchen grew quieter without them. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, along with the steady tick of the wall clock. I stood by the table, unsure whether to sit back down or return to painting. Then she stepped closer, pulling out a chair and sinking into it with a soft exhale. "Sit," she said gently, patting the chair beside her. Her tone wasn't commanding, it was weary, almost uncertain. I obeyed, lowering myself until we sat side by side, knees brushing lightly under the table. For a moment she stared at her hands resting on the wood, fingers curled together, as though she were holding something fragile. Then she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "This feels complicated," she murmured. "Doesn't it?" I looked at her profile, the way the afternoon light traced across her cheekbones and softened the faint lines near her eyes. She wasn't smiling now. There was no teasing lilt in her voice. Just honesty, bare and unguarded. I hesitated before answering. "A little," I admitted. "But complicated isn't always bad." Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, testing. Then she let out a breath, her lips curving into something between a smile and a sigh. "You're too young for this," she said. "For me. For all of this." There it was, the words I'd been expecting, the ones hanging silently between us since the first brush of her shoulder against mine. But hearing them aloud didn't make me retreat. Instead, it drew something out of me. I shook my head. I wouldn't be here if I didn't want to be. Silence settled over us again, thicker now. Her hand shifted slightly on the table, fingers brushing against mine. Tentative at first, as if she might pull back. But she didn't. She let her palm rest lightly over my hand, her skin warm, her touch steady. That simple contact seemed to quiet something inside her. She leaned back, eyes half closing, as though the weight of her own confession had lifted, if only a little. I could feel her thumb move faintly, almost unconsciously, across my knuckles. The closeness wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of intimacy that crept in quietly, threading itself through stillness, through the way our knees pressed together under the table, through the sound of our breathing overlapping in the hush of the kitchen. And though part of me wanted to lean closer, to bridge the gap entirely, I stayed still. Not out of fear, but out of respect, for her, for the moment, for the truth we were both just beginning to let ourselves admit. When her friends' voices floated back in from the hall a few minutes later, she slipped her hand away. But the warmth of her touch stayed with me, steady as a heartbeat, long after the door opened again. The sound of the front door opening pulled us both back to ourselves. She straightened subtly in her chair, smoothing her sleeve as though erasing what had just passed between us. But I still felt it, the echo of her hand over mine, the quiet weight of her words. Her friends re-entered the kitchen carrying small shopping bags, their laughter trailing behind them. The air seemed lighter again, though not in a way that erased what had happened. It was more like the room had taken a deeper breath. "Did we miss anything?" the one with wavy hair asked, setting her bag on the counter. Her tone was casual, playful, but her eyes flicked between the two of us with a sharpness that told me she sensed something. "Not much," she replied quickly, her smile polite, almost practiced. Then she rose to refill the teapot, as if the small task might shield her. I stayed where I was, seated at the table, trying to steady my expression as the other two drifted back into the room's rhythm. One pulled out a chair across from me, crossing her legs with deliberate ease. The other slid into the seat beside me, close enough that her shoulder brushed mine as she settled. It should have felt suffocating, being surrounded like that. But it didn't. Instead, it felt enveloping. Like stepping into a circle that had already been drawn, one I hadn't realized was waiting for me. The woman beside me reached forward, nudging a fresh cup of tea in my direction. "Here," she said softly, her fingers grazing mine on the handle for just a second longer than necessary. Her bracelets chimed faintly with the movement, then fell silent as she withdrew her hand. The one across from me tilted her head, studying me as though I were a painting still being considered. "You handle yourself well," she remarked. Her voice wasn't teasing, it was approving, almost like she wanted me to know I'd passed some invisible threshold. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let myself notice the details, the way the late afternoon light caught in their hair, the warmth of their presence pressing in from every side, the way their laughter rose and fell like waves. My hostess returned then, placing the teapot down between us. She sat on my other side, and suddenly I was at the center of their small circle, two beside me, one across, their faces open, expectant, as though I belonged there without question. For a moment, conversation drifted to simple things again, recipes, neighbors, memories from years past. But under it all ran something quieter, unspoken yet undeniable. Every brush of a hand, every shared glance, every pause before laughter carried a charge that words didn't dare touch. One of them reached over playfully to brush my hair from my forehead. Another leaned her arm on the back of my chair, her elbow almost grazing my shoulder. Small gestures, ordinary on the surface, yet they layered over each other until the warmth of them felt like a blanket drawn snugly around me. The kitchen no longer felt like just a place where walls were being painted. It felt like the center of something unfolding, something that wasn't hurried, wasn't forced, but quietly, steadily drawing me deeper in. And in their presence, three women, each different, each remarkable, I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I felt chosen. By the time the last brushstroke dried, evening had begun to settle outside. The golden light through the lace curtains had deepened into something softer, more amber, casting the kitchen in a glow that made even the unfinished walls look alive. The paint cans were closed, brushes rinsed, ladders folded away. What remained wasn't just the work we had done but the atmosphere we had built together, something that hung in the room thicker than the scent of paint, thicker than the tea still steeping in its pot. We lingered at the table, none of us in a hurry to leave. The chairs had been pulled closer, our circle smaller now, our movements slower, quieter. The conversation had shifted from playful questions to something easier, like we no longer needed to test each other. We talked about little things, favorite films, small disappointments, moments in life that had shaped us, but each word carried weight, because we weren't really speaking about films or disappointments. We were sharing ourselves. I noticed the way her head tilted slightly toward me whenever I spoke, as though she wanted to catch every word. I noticed the faint brush of her friend's hand against my arm when she leaned across to refill my cup, the way the other rested her chin on her palm and watched me with a softness that hadn't been there earlier in the day. At one point, without even thinking, I leaned back in my chair, and she, my hostess, rested her head gently against my shoulder. It was such a simple gesture, so natural, that I almost missed how monumental it felt. Her hair brushed my jaw, her weight light but steady against me, and in that small contact, I felt her trust, her surrender. Her friends didn't laugh or tease. They didn't even comment. Instead, one of them reached forward and touched my hand where it rested on the table, her fingers light, lingering. The other shifted her chair closer, her knee brushing mine under the wood. None of it felt forced, none of it staged. It was quiet, steady, and strangely right. We sat like that for a long while, the four of us in a kitchen filled with the scent of fresh paint, tea, and faint perfume. The world outside seemed far away, irrelevant. What mattered was here, their warmth, their presence, the silent understanding that had grown over the course of the day. I realized then that maybe this hadn't been about the walls at all. The walls were just the excuse, the canvas. What truly mattered was the space between us, the colors we had unknowingly brushed into one another's lives. When I finally stood to leave, none of them urged me out. They rose with me, gathering near the doorway, their closeness like a soft current holding me in place. She walked me to the threshold, her hand brushing mine one last time, her eyes filled with something quiet and hopeful. And as I stepped into the evening air, the scent of paint still clinging to my shirt, I carried with me the unshakable sense that I hadn't just helped them paint a kitchen. I had been invited into something far deeper, a circle, a bond, maybe even a beginning. The walls would dry overnight. But the memory of that day, the warmth of their company, the way her whisper had changed everything, would stay with me much longer.